In this video, we're going to look at drag and drop file uploads in React, where you can create this drop zone area for the users to drop their files. We're going to show them a preview of the files they've selected. They're able to delete anyone they don't like. We can also implement some restrictions on the type or size of the files they can upload and reject the ones that don't meet our criteria. Later on, we're going to also look at uploading these images to a cloud storage service like Cloudinary. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hamid. I'm a full stack JavaScript developer, and here on this channel, we mainly talk about modern web dev topics like React and NextJs. So let's go. To get started, I have created a brand new Next.js app by running npx create next app. I've also included a link to the source code in the description, so if you want to follow along with me. And all I had done so far was to replace the content of the homepage with this simple component with this title tag and a custom drop zone component, which we're going to build together. Now, to implement the functionality for the file upload, we're going to use a library called react-dropzone. And all this library is doing is that it exposes this use-dropzone hook that we can call inside of our component to get some functions back that helps us create this div or container for our input file picker and the drag and drop functionality. So let's just copy this code over, and I'm going to explain what we're doing over here. So first off, you have to install this library. I've already done it. So go ahead and install that library, and we're going to get this use drop zone hook from the library. Now we have to call this hook with some options, mainly the onDrop callback function. This is a callback which is going to get executed once actually a user drops some files. As you can see up top here, we're defining this onDrop with use callback from React so that we're not recreating this function over and over again every time this component re-renders. And this callback function receives the accepted files. It also receives the rejected files. We're going to talk about later once we talk about other options that we can pass to use drop zone. And this hook is going to give back two functions mainly to us, the get root props and the get input props. We're going to use those two functions and spread the properties returned from them on this outermost div and our input, which then gives us the event listeners for click, for drag events on these DOM nodes, which is necessary for the drag and drop functionality or allowing users to click on our drop zone to upload some files. Now, this form is not necessary. I've just included it here because later on we're going to use Cloudinary to upload our files. But mainly this div, which is the outermost div with this get root props and this input file where you have this get input props. Now, if I save this and go back to our local host, you can see this drag and drop over here showing up. Now, unfortunately, when I click on it, it opens, but you won't be able to see like my browser window here because it's not part of the screen recording, but it opens up. So if I, for example, drop a file here, you can see the text changes there. And the reason why the text changes there is that we're listening or checking this is drag active property returned from this use drop hook, which tells us if the drag is active. It's actually when the user is dragging something over our div. And if I open up the console here, we're logging the accepted file. So if I drag a file over here, we can see down here that we have this file array, which is returned from drop zone hook that contains one file that gives us the name, the path, and the size and the type of the file that the user actually dropped over here. Now, first thing that we want to do is to show a preview of the file the user just selected so they know something happened or it went through. But before we get there, on the homepage, you can see on this custom drop zone component that I have, I'm passing in some classes to kind of design this drop zone. But right now, we're not using those classes over here. So all I want to do is to design or to style this div. And I'm passing in class name to my component. So Let me just go ahead and destructure class name in my component. And I want to use this on my div. So you would think to just pass it like so. And that works for class name. And as you can see, now the design over here changed. But the proper way of actually doing it is not to pass any other attributes to this divs where you are spreading these two functions. Instead, any attribute that you want to pass, instead of passing it directly to that div, you have to pass it to this function. So pass an object, and on that object, you can pass in any attribute you would have otherwise passed in to the div. And as you can see, it didn't change anything. But this way, we're preventing ourselves from overriding the attributes set by this function, or this function overriding our attributes. So this is the recommended way from the documentation. Okay, so what we want to do is to show the user a preview of the files they've actually selected so they know it went through. So let's create a state here for files and set files with use state hook from React, and we're going to initialize this to an empty array. And let me just copy the code over here. So inside of this on drop callback function, instead of logging the files, what we're going to do is that we're going to check to see if there is any accepted files, and if there is any, we're going to set them to our local state. And the way that we're doing it here is that we're going to get any previous files that we have, because we don't want to overwrite the files. We want to enable the users to upload multiple files. So we're going to get the previous file. So we're passing in a function to set files, our state setter, that receives the current or the previous files. We're going to spread all of those files, and we're going to this newly received accepted files. We're going to map over every file. And for every file, what we're doing is we're basically spreading over the content of the file with the object.assign. It just copies the properties of this object into this object and returns. So that's what object.assign does. It's similar to doing this file and then this preview. So it's similar to spreading it. Nevertheless, so what we're doing is we're copying the file and we're just adding this preview property to it, which is calling the create object URL on the URL interface by passing this file to it. Okay, so every file now in our local state is going to have whatever that we were returning from the use drop zone hook here, and we're just going to add a preview parameter or property to it, where we can just show it with an image tag on our component over here. So let me just save this. So let's actually come down here and create a little preview section where let's render an unordered list where we get our local state. We map over our files, and for each file we're going to return a list element. And let's just for now get the file name. Let me just also pass in a key so it stops screaming at us. So file name over here, let me just save this up and clear the console. So if I drag a file over here now, we are seeing this turbo.jpg, which is the name of the file I just uploaded. Now we can go ahead and actually show an image over here. So let's get image from next image. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the source property of our image to the file.preview that we just created. Let's also give it an alt tag for now, with a width of maybe 100 and a height of also 100. This should show our image over here. So we just, yep, you can see the image that I just uploaded there. If I actually go ahead and upload another image, we should be able to see that image as well, because what we're doing is instead of replacing our state every time the user drops a new file, we are just spreading over, or we're receiving the previous files and we're just adding to that array. Let me just copy over a little styled component that I've created before, so you don't have to watch me kind of write CSS over here. As you can see on this component, I'm using hero icons from the headless UI or the Tailwind team. Let me just import this up top over here. And I'm going to explain what we're doing here. So in these accepted files, all we're doing is we're having a title, we're still mapping over our files, showing the image. Something from the documentation you need to keep in mind is once you have loaded the image in this image component, it's better to revoke that object URL, so you would prevent memory leaks if you are uploading, or the user is uploading too many images. We're going to also use effect later on to revoke all the URLs once this component is unmounted later on. But for now, this is the same image component that we had. I'm also including a button so that the user can actually remove this specific file with that file name. Okay, so let's just create this function over here where we would say const remove file. It's going to receive a name, and all it's going to do is going to set the files to get the files, and actually filters any file whose file.name does not equal this name we passed. Sorry, if that makes sense. Okay, so right now, as you can see here, if I go ahead and drag a file, we see the preview over here, we see the name down there, and we have this little X icon that allows the user to click and remove this file. And if I upload a couple of files over here, you can see we see all the preview for them. You can remove any one that you don't want, so forth and so on. So that's the accepted files. Now the next concept that we want to talk about is the other properties you can actually set to this use drop zone, where you can set some restrictions. So for example, if you want to accept only a specific file type, for example, we only want to accept image PNG or text HTML, that's how you actually do it. If you want to only accept let's say images, any type of images, so on this drop zone hook that I have over here, I can have this accept property, and this is going to be an object that I can pass in. I can say image /star. This indicates that we are accepting any kind of an image, and in this case, when you actually open up this file picker, it only shows you the images. Unfortunately, you don't see my file picker here, but this means that if the user now tries to drop something else other than an image, it's not going to get accepted. It's going to go in the rejected files. Now, to see the rejected files that actually don't pass this restrictions that we pass to use drop zone, I'm going to use a size restriction. So let's go back to here. On this drop zone component, you can see all the different props or values you can pass in. So you can pass in maximum number of files or max size. So I'm going to copy this and say, hey, we want to accept images, and our max size for each, our max size for each file, let's say it's 124, and that's number of bytes, so times 1,000. Let's go back here, and if I refresh, if I now drop a big file that I have over here, I just dropped it, or let me do this actually, let me refresh. I'm going to drop the same 4 files that I dropped before, and out of them only 3 are inside the accepted files, and one which is bigger than a meg megabyte, it's actually not included in our accepted files. Now to show them also here, this onDrop callback function, as I mentioned, on top of the accepted files, it also receives the rejected files. So let me just get that here, rejected files. And maybe for now, we can just log the rejected files. So let me just refresh over here, and I'm going to drag the same 4 files again. So we are dealing with the same thing. As you can see down here in this array in the console, I have my rejected files. It's an array of objects. Each object has an error property and the file property. So it tells you, hey, this file you were trying to upload with the Turbo JPG, that's a big image, which you can see the size is, 5 megabytes. It's more than 1 megabyte that we have set. It's an image, so it allows the image, but the size restriction is not passing through, and it gives you an error object too. So the errors is an array actually of error kind of messages or objects, where a file may have multiple errors. So if I, let's say, try to drag and drop a large PDF, where it's PDF, it's not image, so that's one error, and it's large, more than 1 megabyte, and that's the second error that we're going to get. So on the error, we have that the file is too large, and the message is that what you can show to the user. Okay, so let's also keep track of our rejected files. So right now, we have a local state for our files. Let's create another state from our use state. So this time, let's initialize it to an empty array, and let's call these guys rejected files. And or let's just say rejected and set rejected. Okay, and what we're going to do down here, instead of lodging this rejected files that we received from this onDrop function, we're going to actually do the same thing we did here to set our local state. So we just copy the code that I have over here. So all we're doing this time is, again, if there is any rejected files, we're going to get our previously rejected files, and we're going to just append this files to those files. Now for the rejected files, we're not going to create a preview because they've been rejected. We just want to show the maybe file name and the reason, the error message that we are rejecting those files. So we have this state, we have this state setter. Let me just also copy this section that I have here for our rejected files so we can actually show them on the page. So let me copy over this rejected section. And again, with this, we have this rejected file section, and we have to create this remove rejected as well, which is a similar function to the remove file function we created that receives a name. And this time it calls the set rejected and actually gets the files. These are the current files, and it's going to filter. Now remember that this files here in our state, actually it's like a wrapper that has the error property and the file property, so we have to destructure the file out of it. So file destructured out of it, where the file name is not equal to name. Okay, so that's our remove files. Now if I upload the same 4 images again, you can see over here that 3 of them pass and are accepted. This one, which is bigger, we have the file name as well as the error message that says, I hope you can see this, file is larger than this million bytes or 1 megabyte, so therefore it's being rejected. Now we can also go ahead and remove that file. It's the same functionality that we had up there. Now similar to the accepted files up there, I'm just getting the rejected files over here, mapping over every item. And remember, there's a wrapper around the file because it also gives us the error. So it's an object with the file property and errors. So I'm just structuring the file and errors from it. For every file, I'm showing the name. I'm also mapping over the errors. Remember, the errors was an array of different error objects with code and message. So we're getting the errors array. We're mapping over each one, and we're showing the code. We're showing the message, and we're setting the code as a key. I've also included this button that removes that specific file from our rejected files. In the next step, let's actually look into uploading these images to our cloud storage system. Up until this point, we've been handling these files locally in the browser. We've been using the file reader API or the react-dropzone component to just allow the user to select these files. We haven't uploaded any image to the cloud or to our database. For the purpose of a cloud storage, I'm using Cloudinary. You can use S3 or Google Cloud Storage. The steps and the concept would be the same. They either going to give you an SDK you can use to upload images, or in the case of Cloudinary, we could set an upload preset which exposes a REST API endpoint for us to easily upload images. So if you come to the settings tab under the upload section, if you scroll down, you can see these upload presets that you could set. All you need to do is to hit this add upload preset, where you can set a name and you can specify a folder where these images would be saved in your media library. And for the signing mode, you're going to select unsigned. I'm going to select the unsigned for the purpose of this tutorial. The signed version is where you need to authenticate for the API to work, but the unsigned version just works out of the box. And under this upload manipulation, you can also set some parameters. So incoming transformation, you can transform the images as they're coming in to a specific size, quality, so that if somebody is, for example, uploading a big image, you could just reduce it to a smaller size image, so it's not going to fill up your storage size. The only other thing you need from Cloudinary is your API endpoint. So if you come to your dashboard, you could see this API environment variables. If you click on this more info button, you can copy your own specific API endpoint and maybe bring it back to your project and set it as a local environment variable so that you could hit this endpoint. This is a REST API endpoint where it allows you to upload your images. I'm prefixing this Cloudinary URL environment variable name with next public, so it exposes it in the client side, because if you're sending this from the client side, without it, it's going to be only accessible on the server side, which is not the way that we're doing it here. So let me just go back. Bear with me for a second. I'll just copy over the code and I'm going to explain to you what exactly we're doing here. So as you can see, this upload to Cloudinary button, all it does is that it submits this form we had from the beginning. I have added this handle submit function, and this is the logic of uploading our files to Cloudinary. So let's see how we're doing this. So first things, we are preventing the default behavior of the form submission in the browser. We're looking to see if we have any files over here, and if we do, we're going to create a new form data object. We're going to mapping over our file's state, and for each file we're going to append a new entry to our form data with the content of that actual file. And the only other thing we need to do, which is Cloudinary specific, is that we have to append this upload preset key into our form data that's set to the namespace of our upload preset that we just created together. So whatever name you had there, you will put your name over here. Mine is called Friendsbook, so I set upload preset to Friendsbook. And because it's an unsigned upload kind of endpoint, you don't need to authenticate as long as you include the name of your offset over here. I'm getting the URL from the local environment variables that again we set together, and as I explained before, it's prefixed with next public, so it's exposed to the client side because we are running this in the browser, and we're sending a fetch request to that endpoint, which is our Cloudinary API endpoint, a method of post, and the body is just that form data we created here with the files inside of it. So we're not going to JSON stringify our body, it's just the form data. We're going to get the response back, turn it into a JSON, and log this data in our console. So let me just go ahead and take in a file over here, drag it there, and hit upload. And we're going to get our response back from Cloudinary. Let me just drag this a bit bigger. So on the Cloudinary, you can see that it gives you back the information of the file, and it also gives you this secure URL, which is the URL that you can securely access this specific image we just uploaded to our Cloudinary. We can then use this as string maybe to save a record to our database. Instead of having the files in our database, we are going to upload it in any cloud storage that we're using, and then getting that string, getting that URL back, and then saving that URL into our backend database, whether it's a profile image or maybe they're trying to submit a post like in Facebook and Twitter. You can just save this URL back in your database. That's a wrap for this video, folks. We looked at drag and drop file uploads in React using react-dropzone. We saw how we can use native browser APIs to show the user a preview of the selected files without hitting our cloud storage or database. We also looked at how we can restrict the file selections by size or by type and reject the files if they don't meet the criteria. We also looked at how we can upload the selected images or the accepted files to our Cloudinary service or any other cloud storage service for that matter, get a URL back that we can maybe in the next step save in our database. If you have any questions, hit them in the comments for me. I'll try to be as responsive as I can down there. If you learned something from this video, give it a like. It helps put it in front of more people like you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.